Imagine standing on the edge of what was once Europe's greatest deep-water harbor, only to discover it had been turned into a complete graveyard of steel and stone overnight. June 27, 1944. Cherbourg, France. Colonel Alden G. Sibley of the 156th Port Construction and Repair Group stared in disbelief at the scene before him. This wasn't random destruction from battle. This was cold, calculated, and terrifyingly complete. 27 ships, freighters, tugs, and even a massive floating dry dock lay deliberately sunk in perfect positions, blocking every single channel. 2 enormous 90-ton gantry cranes, each as tall as a 4-story building, had been toppled straight into the main shipping lane like fallen giants. The harbor walls were blown apart every 100 meters. The 3-kilometer stone breakwater, built over 40 years by French engineers, now had 17 massive gaps. Every bollard was sliced off at the base. Every electrical cable was cut and stripped. Every water main was shattered. Even the lock gates lay twisted at the bottom of the sea. As Colonel Sibley walked through the wreckage, the words of the German commander, General Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben, echoed in his mind. Just one day earlier, upon surrender, von Schlieben had declared with confidence, "I have left you the wreckage of a port that will take 6 months to restore. You may have the men, but you do not have the materials. The harbor is worthless." The stakes could not have been higher. Allied armies were racing inland from Normandy, burning through supplies at a shocking rate. Without a working deep-water port, the entire campaign risked grinding to a halt within weeks. Ammunition, fuel, food, medicine, everything depended on Cherbourg. But how did this level of destruction happen so perfectly? The story began 3 years earlier. In March 1942, Adolf Hitler issued Führer Directive No. 40, ordering that every fortress along the Atlantic Wall must be made completely unusable to the Allies for at least 6 months if captured. Cherbourg, the closest major French port to England, was given special priority. In April 1944, a brilliant German naval engineer named Korvettenkapitän Walter Henke arrived with one mission: prepare Cherbourg for total destruction. Henke wasn't a fighter. He was a meticulous planner who had studied civil engineering in Berlin. His team worked around the clock for weeks, following a secret plan called Hafenvernichtungsplan 4. They began by sinking ships with mathematical precision, using tide charts to position each hull exactly where it would cause maximum blockage. Next, they placed over 500 explosive charges at critical points. The 2 giant cranes received special treatment. Precision charges brought them crashing down into the channel. Finally, they destroyed every service: power, water, refrigeration, even collapsing warehouse roofs. The demolitions were carried out with German efficiency between June 21 and June 26, 1944, as American forces closed in. Cranes were toppled, ships scuttled at 20-minute intervals, and charges detonated one after another. When von Schlieben surrendered on June 26, he believed he had succeeded completely. German confidence was based on real experience. In World War I, they had destroyed Belgian ports so thoroughly that they stayed unusable for 6 months. In 1943, they did the same to Naples, Palermo, and Salerno. Allied engineers needed 3 full months to barely restore Naples. German planners calculated that American forces, with limited equipment, would need at least 12 to 16 weeks, possibly 24 weeks, to fix Cherbourg. They were certain the port would remain useless until December 1944. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had no idea what American industrial power and engineering ingenuity were truly capable of. As Colonel Sibley wrote his first desperate report that afternoon, a massive operation was already being launched, an operation that would shock the world and change the course of the war. What happened next at Cherbourg would become one of the most astonishing chapters in military engineering history, and almost no one saw it coming. Colonel Sibley's urgent report reached the highest levels of Allied logistics command within hours. Major General John C. H. Lee, the man responsible for keeping the entire European theater supplied, read the damage assessment and made one immediate decision: Cherbourg would not wait 6 months. It would not even wait 3. He demanded everything: men, ships, cranes, compressors, welders, divers, and raw industrial willpower be thrown at the problem right now. Within 48 hours the reinforcements began pouring in. The 1057th Port Construction and Repair Group arrived from England. Then the 1060th. Then the 1055th. By the first week of July, more than 11,000 specialized engineers and construction troops were working in Cherbourg, nearly 5 times the number of German soldiers who had defended the city. But numbers alone don't clear 27 sunken ships and hundreds of tons of underwater steel. The Americans brought equipment on a scale the Germans had never imagined possible in one place at one time. Floating cranes capable of lifting 200 tons. High-capacity air compressors that could pump thousands of cubic feet of air per minute. Specialized underwater arc welding rigs. Experimental sonar systems to map submerged wreckage. Mobile machine shops mounted on trucks that could fabricate steel parts weighing up to 3 tons. Thousands of tons of spare cable, pumps, valves, generators, and structural steel. Everything shipped across the channel on the highest possible priority. Commodore William A. Sullivan, one of the Navy's most experienced salvage officers, took overall command of the Marine side. He had led the massive cleanup at Pearl Harbor after the 1941 attack. His deputy, Commander Edward Ellsberg, literally the man who wrote the textbook on deep-sea salvage, stood beside him. At the very first planning meeting, Sullivan dropped the bombshell that stunned even the most experienced engineers in the room. "We are not going to clear one channel at a time," he said. "We are going to work every single sector of the harbor simultaneously." That single sentence broke every conventional rule of harbor salvage. Traditional doctrine said, open one path completely, establish safe navigation, then slowly expand. Sullivan rejected that logic entirely. He divided the entire port into 8 independent sectors. Each sector received its own team, its own floating cranes, its own divers, its own compressors, its own welders. All 8 sectors attacked their problems at the same moment. It was aggressive. Some called it reckless. It turned out to be brilliant. The biggest obstacle was the main shipping channel, now blocked by the 2 fallen 90-ton gantry cranes, Gustav and Heinrich, lying like collapsed bridges across the deepest water. German engineers had calculated that cutting those massive structures apart underwater would take weeks, maybe months. Lieutenant Commander Raymond Sullivan, no relation to the Commodore, went down in a diving bell to inspect the wrecks. What he saw changed the plan instantly. The cranes had toppled in such a way that their main support frames were still largely intact under the surface. Instead of cutting them piece by piece, he proposed something that had never been attempted on objects this size. Lift both cranes out of the water in one piece, using the giant floating cranes. The room went quiet. "It's never been done," one senior engineer objected. "Nothing about this job follows precedent," Commodore Sullivan answered. "Make it work." On July 4, 1944, Independence Day, 2 200-ton floating cranes positioned themselves over the submerged Gustav. Divers spent the morning attaching 6 massive lifting slings at carefully calculated points. At 2 p.m. the order was given. The floating crane's engine screamed. Steel cables groaned under tension that seemed impossible. For 3 long minutes nothing moved except bubbles and spray. Then, slowly, impossibly, the top of crane Gustav broke the surface. Water poured off the twisted girders like a waterfall. By 2:30 p.m. the entire 90-ton structure dangled between the 2 floating cranes. By 4 p.m. it rested safely on a waiting barge. German reconnaissance aircraft flying over the harbor the next morning sent back reports that Berlin initially refused to believe. One of the main channel cranes had vanished in a single day. Crane Heinrich followed on July 6 using exactly the same technique. With the cranes gone, the main channel opened far sooner than anyone, friend or enemy, thought possible. But 27 sunken ships still blocked the rest of the harbor. Here the Americans turned to a technique they had perfected after Pearl Harbor: controlled refloating. Divers located every major hole in each wreck. Underwater welders sealed the breaches with steel patches. Massive compressors then pumped air into the sealed compartments. Slowly, painfully, the ships rose. On July 8 the 4,000-ton freighter SS Renault broke the surface after 2 weeks underwater, water gushing from every opening like a wounded whale. By July 10 8 more vessels had been raised. By July 12 the primary channels were navigable again. All of this happened while parallel teams rebuilt the land side at the same frantic pace. Engineers strung 40 miles of new power lines in 6 days. Navy Seabees fabricated replacement lock-gate components in floating machine shops. Army bulldozers shoved collapsed concrete into the basin to create instant temporary keys. Demolition teams even used controlled explosives to blast new channels through the rubble the Germans had so carefully placed. 24 hours a day, under blazing floodlights that made the harbor glow like daylight from 20 kilometers away, the work never stopped. German observers watching from distant hills reported one chilling observation: Cherbourg never goes dark. On July 16, 1944, just 20 days after Colonel Sibley first set foot on the shattered quays, the moment everyone had been fighting for finally arrived. At 11 a.m. the Liberty ship SS John J. Montgomery eased carefully through the newly cleared main channel. She passed between the spots where Crane Gustav and Crane Heinrich had lain just 12 days earlier. No explosions. No snagged hulls. No delays. At 11:17 a.m. she touched the repaired quay at K2 France. By 4 p.m. that same afternoon, stevedores were unloading her cargo. 5,000 tons of ammunition, medical supplies, rations and truck parts, the very lifeblood the armies inland desperately needed. What the Germans had sworn would take 6 months had taken 20 days. But the Americans didn't stop there. They kept pushing. By the end of July the port was handling an average of over 4,000 tons per day. In August that jumped to nearly 13,000 tons daily. By the first week of September Cherbourg was moving more than 21,000 tons every single day, exceeding its pre-war capacity. In just 1 month the port delivered over 600,000 tons of supplies, exactly the amount German planners had confidently predicted would never arrive. The ripple effects were immediate and massive. Operation Cobra, the decisive breakout from Normandy, kept its full momentum. Divisions didn't have to pause and ration shells. Fuel convoys kept rolling. Replacement tanks and trucks kept arriving. The pursuit across France accelerated. German defensive lines that were supposed to buy months of time were overrun in weeks. A classified SATF assessment later calculated that the early opening of Cherbourg shortened the entire campaign by at least 30 to 45 days and prevented somewhere between 15,000 and 25,000 Allied casualties that would have occurred if the armies had been forced into prolonged attritional fighting against freshly prepared German positions. The human cost on the salvage side was heartbreaking but, by the brutal standards of 1944, remarkably low. 3 men lost their lives. Seaman First Class Robert McCarthy drowned July 3 when his airline caught on submerged wreckage. Petty Officer James Hughes was killed July 8 by a delayed action mine that detonated during a routine survey dive. Corporal David Zong of the 156th was struck and killed July 11 when a high-tension crane cable snapped. 17 others were seriously injured. Every single casualty was mourned, but the numbers stood in stark contrast to what would have happened if supply shortages had forced the front to stall. So how did they actually do it? The real answer isn't just cranes and compressors. It's a philosophy that had been quietly built over 20 years. After World War I, the United States Army created the Army Industrial College with one core belief. Future wars would be won by whoever could deliver more material to the battlefield faster than the enemy could destroy it. That idea shaped everything. By the late 1930s, American port construction units were already being designed with requirements that sounded insane to European observers. Restore a completely destroyed major harbor to basic operation within 30 days, carrying every piece of equipment, every spare part, every generator they might need, without depending on local resources. The 156th Port Construction and Repair Group alone arrived with bulldozers, cranes, dump trucks, mobile machine shops, 200 tons of structural steel, and enough generating capacity to power a small city. German engineering units carried basic tools and relied on local materials. American units carried entire construction companies. Command structure made the difference even sharper. German doctrine was rigid and centralized. Lower-level officers rarely acted without approval from above. American doctrine, mission command, gave field officers wide latitude. At Cherbourg, that meant a lieutenant commander could decide to lift a 90-ton crane whole without waiting weeks for permission from London. And when the moment mattered most, logistics priority went absolute. Between June 27 and mid-July, every available ship in the English Channel was redirected to support Cherbourg. Combat divisions waited longer for ammunition so port engineers could get floating cranes and compressors within 24 hours of request. General Omar Bradley accepted the trade-off without hesitation. "Every ton we send to Sibley's men now," he told his staff, "returns 10 tons a day once the harbor opens. That's the best investment we can make." In the end, Cherbourg became far more than a repaired harbor. It became proof of concept. The same rapid clearance techniques were used at Le Havre, 18 days, Antwerp, 23 days, and every major captured port that followed. The after-action reports were studied for decades at West Point, the Naval War College, and every serious logistics school in the world. They showed something the Germans never fully understood. In industrial-age warfare, destruction, no matter how brilliant, almost always loses to construction when the constructor has overwhelming resources, ruthless preparation, and unshakable belief that the impossible can be done in weeks instead of months. The Germans spent 3 months wrecking Cherbourg and thought they had achieved something historic. The Americans fixed it in 3 weeks and barely considered it remarkable. That single difference in mindset and capacity explains more about the outcome of the war in the West than any individual battle ever could. The ruins von Schlieben boasted about became the engine room of Allied victory. And the lesson still echoes today. When destruction meets determined, massively prepared construction, construction wins.